Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan, and joining me today to discuss the state of China's economy is Dr. He Fan, Chief Economist and Managing Director of the Caixin Insight Group, formerly a media company, but now one of those agencies that specialize in providing economic information and analysis. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Let's start by having an overview of the state of the Chinese economy. The world around, we got used to double-digit growth for 3 decades. The latest data suggests that the year-on-year growth rate will be the slowest compared to 1990 for this year. What's going on? Has something fundamental changed that is irreversible, or is this a temporary blip? And will China go back to the kind of growth rates we had in the past? What's your broad outlook?
Well, I think the slowdown of the potential growth rate in China is inevitable. And there's short-term factor, but also a long-term factor. The reason why now we still have a downside risk for Chinese economy, if you look at the three main components of economic growth, namely investment, consumption, and net export. So investment used to be the engine, the most important engine for hyper growth in China. But now investment has declined substantially. Consumption is continue to increase, but not very rapidly. You need to take more time for the increase of consumption ratio. And the net export, because of the sluggish of international market, cannot play the role as one of the engines for China's rapid economic growth as it did before the global financial crisis. So these are the short-term factors. But then there are also change of those fundamentals. One, because of the change of demographic profile. We are entering into the aging society much quicker than people expected before. And second is, as China get closer and closer to the frontier of technology, it will make more and more difficult for China to imitate the advanced technology. So there need to be more innovation, and innovation is much more difficult than just the imitation.
Right.
So I think in the future, that's why in China we are now talking about a new normal. So one implication of this new normal will be the growth rate cannot repeat the two digits growth rate.
So you also endorse the view that this is a structural shift or a structural transition.
Cyclical and also structural.
But primarily structural?
Yeah.
And driven by underlying factors of production?
That's right.
Is this why the Chinese government recently announced relaxation of the one-child norm? Is that driven by demographic and economic concerns, or by concerns of individual freedom and liberty and the right of a family to choose its size?
I think this issue has been discussed for quite a long period of time, and the main reason is for the development, both economically and socially. And when in late 1970s and early 1980s, China first adopted this one-child policy. It is stated quite clearly this is a temporary policy, only for one generation. And now it's already more than 30 years, so it's already the right time to rethink the benefit and
do you think the Chinese government left it too late? That had you relaxed this norm,
I think
maybe you wouldn't have hit the labor constraint so soon?
Yeah, I think if possible, we should act more quickly. That would be better. Yeah.
Because the big advantage that China had of a huge labor force, a cheap labor force, that's gone.
There were a lot of problems. First is this disappearance of the so-called population dividend. We rely on the huge army of young labor and cheap but relatively well-educated labor. And also with this one-child policy, we have some other problem. The one is the aging problem, and second is this gender ratio. So in the future, we'll have more boys than girls. And this is probably one result from this one-child policy.
Which has all kinds of social implications, which may not be easy to remedy. But sticking to the broad macro, the growth picture, we know that the Chinese government has tried to respond to the slowdown in a variety of ways. There's been a considerable effort to cut interest rates in the hope that this will increase investment, for example. But that hasn't worked. I mean, monetary policy does not seem to be effective.
Well,
is that because we're looking at a structural rather than a cyclical shift?
That's the reason. You know, in among economists, there's a saying that monetary policy is like a string. It's easy to pull, but it's very difficult to push. So in times of overheating, and then in times of when you have inflationary pressure, and you can use you can tighten your monetary policy, and that will be very effective.
Cool the economy down.
Yeah, but now the main problem in China is structural reform, and then the role of monetary policy is to maintain this macroeconomic stability, but then you cannot rely on monetary policy to facilitate the structural reform. So I think the reason why monetary policy, there is some change of monetary policy, is mainly this adjustment of the change of some fundamentals. In the past, monetary supply of the central bank mainly coming from the channel of the accumulation of a foreign exchange reserve. So when you have more foreign exchange reserve, central bank will buy US dollar from bank and the company and the individual, and at the same time is injecting liquidity to the financial market. So that's traditionally is the main channel for monetary supply. And now the accumulation of foreign exchange reserve has been declining, and that's the reason why we need to lower interest rate and lower the deposit requirement ratio. So it's to a great extent just to offset the change of this accumulation of foreign exchange reserve.
So it's more a response to, in a way, a structural change rather than...
Yeah, make it still quite normal. It's not an expansionary monetary policy.
Right, okay, understood. And in terms of the state of Chinese banking, there have been concerns expressed by financial analysts around the world of inadequate supervision, inadequate regulation, that perhaps the size of stressed assets or non-performing assets has risen over the last few years. How much of a concern should that be?
Well, international financial community, they always have this habit of predicting financial crisis in China for more than 2 decades. Well, I think the problem is getting worse. That's inevitable because of the slowdown of the Chinese economy, and the profit margin of Chinese banking system has been shrinked quite substantially. They used to have a profit ratio like more than 20%, and now it's almost the reversing. And non-performing loan, the ratio of non-performing loan is also increasing, but I think it's under control, because the nature of financial crisis is not insolvency crisis, it's liquidity crisis. And take into consideration that all the systematic important financial institution, your bank and the security company, insurance company, is all owned by the government. Yeah, so it's very easy to just take your money from one pocket to another pocket. So I don't think we have financial crisis in terms of liquidity problem, but the problem is because the slowdown of Chinese economy, and because the inefficiency of the state-owned commercial bank, and gradually you will accumulate more problem. So in a way, what we should concern is not a financial crisis like that happened in America in 2007 and 2008, but we should be more cautious about a situation as what happened in Japan in 1990s. So there's also the slowdown of the Japanese economy, and then at the end of the day, the they have a lot of zombie bank and a zombie company. So I think that that's the real challenge that China has to face up with.
Right. In the sense that you mentioned the need to increase private consumption as part of the response to this structural shift in the Chinese economy. Would you say that decreasing the role of state-owned enterprises is also essential, and that China, we need to see more private sector companies playing a bigger and bigger role and the state needs to get out, or in your view, does it not matter? Could that be a source of strength actually for China?
Well, ownership of the enterprises is important, but not that important. For the, I think the main concern why people complain quite a lot about the state-owned enterprises is a lot of large state-owned enterprises in China happens to be in those monopoly sector. And because they enjoy this monopoly power and they create a lot of barrier for fair competition, and that will further lead to more inefficiency of the whole economy. And imagine there's a state-owned enterprises, but in a competitive market. So imagine a SOE producing color TV.
Yeah.
So I think its behavior will be more or less the same as a private company. But then now we have the large state-owned enterprises in the energy sector, in the telecommunication sector, and also you can say it's still heavily regulated or directly controlled by the government in healthcare and education.
And banking too, right?
In banking, there's some improvement for competition, but still not enough. So I think it's basically in this area that we need to further opening up. But I think the government strategy is not to privatize the state-owned enterprises. So the buzzword in China for state-owned enterprises reform is mixed economy, meaning that they try to encourage private investors to be involved in the reform of state-owned enterprises. It's a kind of public and a private partnership.
One of the shifts that we've seen, not shifts really, but one of the more positive indicators in the last year has been huge, not huge, but I mean, I think last year Chinese outward FDI was more than $100 billion. This year already in the first 10 months, $95 billion worth of outbound FDI. Is it your sense that foreign direct investment provides the Chinese economy, which is going through the structural change, a window or in a way an avenue to monetize these over-accumulated assets and put them to productive use? Is this what's happening, that in order to deal with the slowdown domestically, FDI, and particularly through the initiatives like One Belt, One Road, or what's called the Belt Road Initiative, that this could become a vehicle for China to bring its growth rates back up a couple of percentage points?
It's one of the consideration, but I think this Road and Belt initiative was first pioneered not by the government, but by private investor. Like a lot of Chinese businessmen already very active in Africa, and they accumulated the experience of the local market, and then they have this information. So I think what the Road and the Belt initiative is to have this forward-looking view, and in the future, how can you diversify China's exporting market?
Right.
And also they are thinking in a different way. So the traditional international trade model will say, well, you produce shares and they produce computers, so you just the trade of different final products. But now the essence of international trade is not the trade between final products. It's more like your value chain. It's more about your production network. So China's outbound investment is trying to create a new regional production network. So combine the market and the producer, and then for countries at a different development level, they can all find their niche on this value chain.
And how does the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank fit in? Is that also part of the same process?
It's related with the Road and Belt initiative, but my personal view is that the importance of AIIB is more than that. This is the first time that China proposed a international organization. And before that, there's only one international organization that China proposed. That is International Association of Bamboo and Canes. So imagine for a large emerging power like China, and then it doesn't play an active role in the global governance of economic affairs. So I think this is a test of water. And while the response from other countries, including India, is quite positive, so this will in turn encourage China to play a more important role in this reform of global governance.
If the US and Europe had been more responsive to the demand of China and the BRICS countries from 2009 onwards for a more equitable international financial governance system, do you think the AIIB may not have come into being then? If the
Probably. So one background is for emerging markets like China and also India, Russia, and Brazil are getting more and more disappointed with the slow progress of the reform of Bretton Woods system. It is the
very fine commitments, but no progress on the ground at all.
Yeah, that's right. So we have to find other way to increase the voice of those emerging markets on the international arena.
Were you surprised by the support that the AIIB has generated from around the world, including countries like Britain, which ignored the friendly advice of Washington not to sign up?
Well, I think it is at a very early stage, and that I think shows that there's really a need for a new type international organization like AIIB, because there's a huge deficit of infrastructure investment. So the rationale is there, and then the demand is there, but then we need to be very careful because devils are in the details. So in what way that you can make AIIB to be different with World Bank and IMF, because you don't want to reinventing the wheel, but at the same time, yes, there will be competition between international organizations. I think that's a good thing, but at the same time, I think the existing international organization and the emerging international organization need to have more coordination and cooperation. But how we can do that, we still have to wait and see.
There's another bank on the block, which is the New Development Bank, the so-called BRICS Bank. Is there a danger that the AIIB will overshadow BRICS Bank completely, or is there still a role for the BRICS
Not really.
Bank?
It's all at the very early stage, and it's like you're doing experiment. So you're doing one experiment in AIB and another in the New Development Bank.
Yeah.
And also China has some other proposal like People's Bank of China, the central bank in China. They also established this Silk Road fund, and that's also for helping Chinese company to do investment abroad. And what else? We also have this National Development Bank. Used to be very active in the international market. So there's all kinds of financial institutions, and each of them may have their own role, their own function in reforming the global governance.
Given the links between institutions like AIIB and global geopolitics, if you will, it's inevitable that the US decision to push ahead with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and now we know that they have concluded the first level of negotiations. That there's a treaty, there's a text out that is in the public domain finally. How does China look at the TPP? Is it something? Do you agree with those analysts who argue that the TPP is designed by the US to exclude China, or do you think it is something more than that? That essentially the US is trying to create a new set of rules, and if China agrees to play by those rules, then it could also be part of this club?
Well, I both agree and disagree. Agree because I think the United States really want to have a higher standard. So you went to Washington D.C. and talk with American, and what they tell you is WTO is dead. So they try to have this new higher level international trade rule, including competition, investment, dispute settlement, and more strict intellectual property right. So all kinds of, it's not the traditional trade issue, it's higher standard. Well, China doesn't has a very strong opinion on that, because China is further with China's further development, and we also need this higher standard. But what China concern is that this TPP negotiation is not transparent, so we don't know what is going on there, and we think that if we solely rely on those MAC regional trade agreement, it may hurt the legitimacy of a multilateral trade system, the WTO system. It's
Do you agree that WTO is dead, the way the Americans say?
No, we don't.
I mean, it's a bit, it's.
We think WTO is the most important institution.
But it's not surprising that America would say it's dead, because this is supposed to be the so-called Doha development round, which is supposed to be completed.
But but in China, because we have this experience of China's entry into WTO, so China is a rare case that if you talk with policymaker in China, if you talk with entrepreneur in China, if you talk with ordinary people in China, and they tend to have a more positive view on globalization compared their peers in the developed country and in some developing country. So I think China sincerely believes that WTO is the first best solution for international trade governance, and then regional trade agreement will be the second best. It is only because of the slow progress of WTO negotiation that countries, including China and other countries, and we have been involved in this regional trade agreement. But we believe that this regional trade agreement cannot hurt the authority of the WTO system.
And you think the way the TTP has evolved is likely to injure, is likely to hurt the WTO system?
Yeah, we have to wait and see, but for the time being, I think this concern is legitimate. Yeah.
And in terms of the TTIP, the so-called Atlantic North American, that also seems to be, again, these are the building blocks of entirely new sort of a system, which poses the challenge for countries like China or India or Russia. So you have this parallel, curious situation where even as the BRICS countries are trying to do various things, you have this response from the United States.
Yeah, that's right. So you look at not only China, but also other emerging, large emerging countries, as you mentioned, are all absent in this and those emerging regional trade agreement. And that's not normal, and so I think we should stick to WTO negotiation. Even now it has difficulty, but we have to be more innovative and then find ways to facilitate the reform of WTO system.
On that note, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. He Fan.
Thank you. Yeah.
That wraps up this episode of Indian Standard Time. Do join us again next week with another guest. Thank you for watching.